They say that China has become so powerful that it threatens American primacy. And China's rise is no longer in America's interest. How many wars has China been in the last 40 years? Let me count them. That would be zero. Not one war in 40 years. How many overseas military bases does China have? It's debated. There's one for sure, the US 750. So this is a game, and it's a very, very serious game. And it's getting us closer and closer to annihilation.
Putin vis-a-vis Ukraine. Of
Because
China,
I know what
China and Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. Of Bashar al-Assad saying he's fighting terrorism while he's barrel bombing Syrian people. Why are you so partial to their justification but not Netanyahu's?
First of all, because I know that most of these things like Xinjiang is Western blah, 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 blah narrative.
But what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that there are tens of thousands of people being slaughtered in Gaza, and there is not even one story about murders in Xinjiang.
But you'd accept some bad things are happening.
It could be bad things, but to call that a genocide and to be making an actual genocide in Gaza is a game of Western narratives. You take our current story in the United States of China, the warlike China. How many wars has China been in the last 40 years? Let me count them. That would be zero. Not one war in 40 years. When was the most recent war that China was in? January 16 to February 16, 1979. 1 month in a conflict with Vietnam, which had to do actually with Vietnam having overthrown a government in Cambodia. Okay, 1 month. We are not at dire risk from China. China is not mass murdering its population, but we are gearing up in the United States for war with China. Why? Well, once again, people actually wrote why. You have to know where to look, but if you look at the Council on Foreign Relations, an article by a former colleague of mine, Robert Blackwell and Ashley Tellis, in 2015, they say that China has become so powerful that it threatens American primacy. And China's rise is no longer in America's interest. And so you watch this mentality in the US go into effect. Suddenly, because China's economically successful, they're not just economically successful, they're the enemy. Right. So everything becomes rhetoric. In the case of Ukraine, which I have followed from 1990 as advisor not only to Mikhail Gorbachev and advisor to Yeltsin, but also advisor to President Leonid Kuchma of Ukraine. I was advising the Ukrainian government in 1994. I'm not against Ukraine in any way. I'm against using Ukraine and Ukrainians being slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands because the United States wants to move another piece on the board to have its military bases on the border of Russia. And why, by the way? Because again, there's a whole telltale line of reasoning. Just like the Soviet Union broke up, we can induce Russia to break up along ethnic lines. This is a meme of Washington. These people are out of their minds to be provoking us towards nuclear war this way.
When you focus on the crimes of the superpower, and you've been accused of this, does it make you an apologist for the Chinese, an apologist for the Russians? Tell me why we shouldn't also focus on their very well documented crimes and the effects of those as well.
First, if we look at things quantitatively, the biggest gangster of the 19th century was Britain, by far. And they just loved their empire, and they commanded around 25% of the world's territory at the height of the British Empire. And there is a well-known semi-humorous but quite serious book documenting the 23 countries that Britain never invaded, meaning that Britain invaded the whole world. Britain made provocations. Britain made wars everywhere. I feel the United States learned, sitting on Britain's knee, everything we know about empire we learned from Britain. And there was almost a handover of the baton from Britain to the United States, from Churchill, basically to Truman, I would say, at the end of World War II. And the megalomania took a big jump in the United States. Dean Acheson, one of our top diplomats, wrote his memoirs called Present at the Creation. Okay, well, it's a little bit of the mindset, the creation. This was, of course, what it meant was the beginning of the American-led world. Quantitatively, the U.S. absolutely is different and absolutely has a foreign policy that is different from all other countries. What other country has 750 overseas military bases?
Well, why did they put their countries next to the U.S. bases?
That's exactly right. You look at that map of China surrounded by the U.S. military bases with that question coming out of the map. The military bases are everywhere. That's distinctive. The country number 2, by the way, of most military bases to this day, it's not China or Russia, these big populous countries. It's Britain because it's the legacy. Britain still still runs all these islands where they have naval bases and so forth, the listening systems and so forth around the world. Of course, it's not a great power anymore, but it still has more than 100 overseas military bases. How many overseas military bases does China have? It's debated. There's one for sure in Djibouti, kind of a naval repair base. It's argued that maybe there are 2 or 3 or 4, possibly. The U.S., 750. So this is quantitatively something different. Then the U.S. exercises its power in a unique way. Covert regime change. Covert regime change, basically CIA operations. The CIA was created in 1947. There's an excellent book by a scholar named Lindsay O'Rourke at Boston College, 2017. She's a student of our great political scientist John Mearsheimer. And she counts 64 covert regime change operations between 1947 and 1989. She stops at the end of the purported end of the Cold War. We now know it never ended, but she stops in 1989 because she says, I can get the documentary record till then. I happen to know firsthand many others, and we know of many others since then. What other country does that at this scale? It's unbelievable.
But can't two things be true at the same time? So we can say that the CIA helped overthrow the Shah, for example, in Iran, but that doesn't mean...
But by the way, one thing that's interesting, if I could just say about it, these are covert regime change operations. A little weird. Of course, the regime change is obvious. Of course, the moment it happens, everyone says the United States. So what's covert about it? What's covert about it is the United States said, no, we didn't do it.
Yeah, no responsibility.
We didn't do it. And then everyone looks around and says, well, we pretty sure you did it, but we can't say you did it. We can't prove you did it. Or even if you can prove you did it, we better not say you did it. So there's nothing really covert about it. Sometimes it's so absurd. It's so tragic. I'll give you an example. There was a president of Haiti that I liked. Aristide. He said to me in 2001, as I was in his office in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, Jeff, they're going to get me. I'm always a little naive, So I said, no, Mr. President, they're not going to get you, and I'm going to help you, and everything's going to be fine. And then in 2002, 2003, you watch the Bush administration. No IMF loans for Haiti, no World Bank loans for Haiti, turn off the Inter-American Development Bank. This is the way you start tightening, add sanctions, squeeze the finances. Then the economy's cratering, but he stays in power. He's got a strong base, political base. One day, literally, the U.S. ambassador walks to his house and says, I need to save your life, because otherwise your life is at risk. There's an insurrection underway, so come with me. And they guide him to an unmarked plane, no tail markings, and they put him in the plane, and 23 hours later, he's in the Central African Republic. Okay, so there's a coup in broad daylight, and I called the New York Times reporter, and I said, could you cover this? The U.S. just overthrew the Haitian government. The reporter on the beat said, Jeff, my editor's not interested in it. So this is a game, and it's a very, very serious game, and it's getting us closer and closer to annihilation, because Haiti is one thing, Ukraine is another thing.
Right.
In Ukraine, we know in late January 2014, you have Victoria Nuland, now my colleague at Columbia University, on the phone with the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Sachs, who is still a senior State Department official. Okay, who's the new government gonna be? Yeah, maybe Klitsch. No, not Klitsch. He should stay out. I think Yatsenuk, he's the guy. They discuss who they're going to put in for the new government. And on February 22nd, a few weeks later, it's Yatsenuk. He becomes the new prime minister. The U.S. is part of yet another coup. And by the way, that's the start of the Ukraine war. That's literally the start of the Ukraine war. The war didn't start in February 2022, it started in 2014.
But there's still thousands of Ukrainians who say we had very legitimate reasons to go to Maidan against Yanukovych. We were there because we didn't like our guy.
That's correct.
So the point being that two things could be true at the same time, right?
Yeah, but my view is that the United States should have nothing to do with overthrowing another government, period. And if you're overthrowing another government because you have a plan to put your military in that country, which is the U.S. plan since 1994, it raises the stakes a little more. And if you're putting in the military base next to the other nuclear superpower, you might say, not the best idea.
Right.
If you do that, knowing, as I do, how many senior diplomats told the politicians, don't do that. Don't do that. This could be disaster. This could lead to war. And not just run-of-the-mill people. I'm talking about George Kennan saying this in 1997, in 1998, that this could be the most consequential disaster. Jack Matlock, who was U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union. Bill Perry, who was Bill Clinton's Secretary of Defense. I know these people. And they know, do not overthrow a Ukrainian government so that you can move NATO forward and expect you're going to have a good outcome. So that's why I say, I don't trust the Americans.
Right. No, and that's very clear.